Hello and welcome to the webinar on Immigration Services Student Visa, organized by Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce in partnership with SMB Business Immigration. I am Adriane Badawi, Market and Public Affairs Manager at BCCC. Before we start, I want to thank you, our annual sponsors, Vale, Proactiva Results, Corby Mining, Brookfield, Lundin Mining, BMA Law, and Mellahawk Logistics for their continued support. This webinar will cover aspects of the student visa application process in Canada, including eligibility criteria, application requirements, and timelines. Before we dive into the main content, I want to introduce the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, the BCCC. We are an independent, non-profit organization that has promoted connections between Brazil and Canada for over 50 years. Our mission is to embrace bilateral trade and investment relations and promote the exchange of experience between both countries, private and public sectors. To learn more about BCCC and stay up to date on upcoming events, please visit our website, the Brazil-Canada Chamber, thebrascanchamber.org, and follow us on social media. And now we are honored to have Sonia Mirbaha, Principal Partner at SMB Immigration Services, and Rebecca Godinho, Immigration Lawyer at SMB Immigration Services, as our presenters. Sonia and Rebecca, let's begin with the informative student visa process session.
Thank you, Adriane. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon for those of you who are joining us from Toronto. It's a gorgeous day if you're here, so everybody has been enjoying the day so far. And if you're outside of Toronto, I hope you're also having a good weather today. So as Adriane mentioned, our firm, SMB Business Immigration, is an boutique immigration firm out of Toronto, and we're mainly focused on all aspects of immigration applications, including student visas, all types of study permits, work permits, and all other kinds of immigration applications. For today's purpose, we're going to be solely focused on study permits and, how they're being processed these days, what are the processing times, what are the requirements, what are the different streams under a study permit, and then what comes after. If you're an international student in Canada, how are you going to work while you're studying, and how are you going to work after you graduate here, which is sort of the main or bulk part of our conversations today. With me, I have Rebecca. Rebecca is our immigration lawyer, is a familiar face and familiar name for anybody who has our clients or has a file with our office. So she's going to be, joining me with kind of conveying all the information that we're trying to give you. As you may know, when it comes to study permits and talking about the procedures and all those little details, there's just so much that we could talk about. And I had a hard time, I'm going to share my screen right now, but I had a hard time compiling all that information and condensing all that information into a few slides so that we don't become too boring of, giving lectures on, but also at the same time being able to transfer enough information to you. So what we decided to do with Rebecca today was to sort of arrange this or sort of manage this webinar in a way that you guys, we could do like a question and answer kind of thing so that you guys can get more information and it doesn't also become a little bit more, I would say, boring or a lecture kind of like, so that hopefully you get enough information, and then you can, the Q&A is here. You can go ahead and pose your questions there. We're also going to be a Q&A session at the end of this webinar, and that's also a great opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. We do have our email addresses again on the last slide at the end of this webinar, which is if there's anything that you can't really pose the question now, or you want to delve deeper and get into more, details, then you can send us an email right after this webinar, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. So are you guys seeing my screen, Rebecca? Is it?
Yes.
Is it good? Okay. All right. So as I said, we're going to be talking about student visas, study permits, and beyond. This is what I decided to call it because really it's more than just the study permits. Our agenda for today is talking about the acceptance letters and what that entails. I'm going to be briefly talking about it, not too much, because that's something that our firm is not really dealing with it. That's something that, educational institutions are directly dealing with the students, but I'll give you brief information about that. How to apply for study permits, the student direct stream, what is that? What does that mean? And, what are the requirements for that? Working while studying in Canada and working after graduating in Canada. And then obviously we'll get into Q&A towards the end of our conversation. So the first slide. Acceptance letters. As I mentioned, the designated learning institutions, what we call a DLI, are the organizations that are recognized, post-secondary organizations recognized by IRCC Immigration Canada that allows to give admission or acceptance to the students. And once students have admissions from those institutions, then they'll be able to apply for a study permit. You just have to make sure that, whoever that's coming on a college level or university level, you just have to make sure that the college or university you're approaching to, the name is on the list of the approved DLIs on immigration's website. Any list, there are some colleges, like smaller colleges mostly in big cities, that are not necessarily listed on there. And if you have an acceptance letter from those institutions, then the likelihood of not being able to apply for study permit is really high. So those were, as I mentioned, those were all post-secondary institutions, but any primary or secondary schools in Canada, high school, for example, they're all automatically part of the DLI. So you might not see the names of the schools on the list, but if you're coming to study here for grade 11, 12, or even for, at a younger age, regardless of being as part of that list or not, you would be able to file your study permit application. Now, getting into the documents required for a study permit. So Rebecca, can you tell us a little bit about what are the generic documents required for study permit in general? And then kind of if you can quickly get into maybe more specific documents required from certain countries, that would be great.
Sure. So we can start with the letter of acceptance that you already mentioned. That is one of the key documents that's required for the study permit application. We also look at proof of financial support. So that could be proof of a Canadian bank account in your name if you've already transferred money to Canada, proof of a student loan from a bank, bank statements for the past 4 to 6 months, a letter from a family member financially supporting you if applicable. So that could be from a parent or a sibling, proof of scholarship. So you can see it's quite heavy on the financial support. Other types of documents are police certificates and medical exams. And that, of course, depends on which country you're coming from. It's not always a requirement. And then we get into consulate specific documents. So for an example, the Brazilian consulate requires certain additional documents, and I'm just going to cover a couple of them. So one of them being the study plan, which is essentially like a letter of explanation, 1 page in length, explaining why you wish to go to Canada, why you chose the specific school or program of study, your overall educational goals, and how this Canadian diploma or degree will increase your employment chances, for example. And then just going back to the financial support piece again, they also ask you for a copy of your most recent tax return. So like Sonia mentioned, there's, every consulate has different requirements that they're looking for. And that's something as your representative, we could definitely look into and help you with. So as far as the next bullet point, Sonia, I think our audience would be interested in knowing whether there are any individuals that are exempt from having to apply for a study permit.
That's a good question because, oftentimes we see situations where people are coming to Canada only to study English language, for a short period of time. So if anybody who's coming to Canada to study in a program that's for 6 months or less, so the duration of the program should be 6 months or less, then the study permit is really not needed. So what needs to be done in that situation is just to provide admission letter or a letter provided from that organization, either the language institution or a college, showing that this person is going to start, the studies or English program or classes from certain date, and obviously being very clear about the duration of the program. And in that case, there is no study permit required. The applicants who doesn't require visa, they can just come to Canada, get a ticket, come to Canada, start the program. The ones that require visa, they can only apply for visitor visa and come here and study for that duration of 6 months. Another set of people or individuals that are exempted from the study permit are minors that are coming as dependent family members to people who are working or studying in Canada. So let's say if a parent is here by work permit or a parent is here to study by study permit, then minor children up to the age of 18 or 19, that's the minority age when it comes to stuff like this. We've got another age, dependency age, which people kind of conflict or sort of confuse most of the times, but for this purposes, 18 or 19 is the age. The reason I say 18 or 19 is that in some provinces it's 18 and in some other are 19, but in Ontario it's 18. And so up to that age, if anybody is coming to accompany a mom or dad who are working or studying here, they don't need a study permit necessarily, and they'll be able to get a visitor visa and come here and go to school. Now, there are many benefits in getting a study permit, one of them being that, and that usually is applicable to older kids, older children, is that once they get a study permit, they'll be able to work in Canada. And so let's say if we're talking about a 16-year-old who's trying to come here with parents, the 16-year-old can very well apply for a visitor visa and come here and go to school, high school. But he or she might apply for a study permit because that gives he or she an opportunity to work here while studying. And so we know that, at that age, kids start working part-time while they're studying and sort of like building up their profile. So there are some benefits in applying for a study permit in general, but it's not necessary. There are exemptions for other group of people as well, family members of foreign representatives in Canada, and there are a whole bunch of other exemption list as well, which I didn't want to include here because that goes on and on. But if you are happen to be part of that list, then you don't necessarily need to get a study permit to study in Canada. So with that, we're going to the next slide and talking about the student direct stream. And so this is going to be very helpful. It's a stream that, sort of expedites the processing time for the qualified individuals, but we're going to delve deeper into what it means and, which countries, residents of which countries are qualified for the program and how does it work. So Rebecca, tell me a little bit about the specific requirements for it. Like, what is SDS in general and what are the requirements for it?
Sure, Sonia. So like you'd mentioned, so the Student Direct Stream is a FAST program designed to accelerate the study permit process for qualified international post-secondary students. And at present, this program is only available to the legal residents of 14 countries. And you can see the list here on our slides. And these can include countries such as Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Peru. And there are certain mandatory requirements that are specific to this program, which include, so a lot of them, as you can see, are similar to the generic study permit application that I mentioned before, but the specific ones to this student direct stream include proof that you've paid for your tuition for your first year of study, obtaining a guaranteed investment certificate or GIC of 10,000 Canadian dollars. So what that is that it works like a savings account in that you deposit money into it and you earn interest on that money. So IRCC or the Immigration Canada favors this type of account because they're considered safe investments, as the financial institutions that sell these are generally obligated to return the investor's principal and interest. Another major requirement for this stream is a language test, which is administered by the IELTS program, or it's called the International English Language Testing System, which is an international standardized test of English language proficiency for non-native English language speakers. And there's a French equivalent as well. So when you do this test, you have to show a minimum score of 6. So that means you have to speak English at a competent level, which is just under a good level, I guess, and which shows that you have an effective command of the language with some inaccuracies or misunderstanding. So that's essentially the gist of this program. And I think we are now moving on to working while studying. So Sonia, if an individual obtains a study permit in Canada, what are the options for them to work at the same time?
Yeah, so this is pretty much a hot topic. So I guess anybody, 9 out of 10 of any student, international student that came to Canada or I've seen coming to Canada and I've, kind of interacted with, they're looking into that working aspect of it because that's what's helping them to eventually convert their temporary residency status here to PR. And so there are multiple options given to the international students. One is working on campus. So there's no limitation on working hours if you decide to work on campus. And what that means is that typically applies for large campuses. When you're going to university or large colleges, there are so many things happening. There are restaurants and coffee shops, and there are clinics, and there are labs, and different parts on campus. So essentially anything that's happening on campus, you can work on it and you work at it if you get accepted. And there's, like I said, no limitation on the number of working hours. You must, however, be a full-time student, and you have to be sort of like actively studying in the program in order to be qualified to work on campus. And you don't necessarily need any specific work permit or any specific conditions on your study permit in order to do that. Another way of working, in case if you can't find a job on campus or your campus is small enough that there are not too many jobs available, you can work off campus as well. There is a limitation on that. Used to be a limitation of 20 hours off campus. However, because of all the shortages of skilled talent in Canada and government realizing that there are not too many qualified candidates for the jobs here these days, they sort of extended that. So they're saying that, as you can see on my last bullet point, I'm kind of jumping to the last one first, for the duration of November 2022 to December 2023, whoever that has a study permit valid within this duration would be able to work more than 20 hours outside of the campus or off campus. There are certain requirements and there are certain specifications to it, but essentially if you're a full-time student and if you've got a valid study permit, and if your study permit also carries condition which allows you to work off campus, that's a very important element to it. If you don't have that, you won't be able to work off campus. And then you can actually work more than 20 hours. Going back to my bullet points here, as I mentioned, your study permit has to explicitly indicate the conditions allowing you to work off campus. You must be a full-time student. The only way that you're sort of like a part-time student and still be able to work off campus is that it's the last semester of your study and you've taken all your courses and there are just few courses left, and so you're technically considered part-time. In that case, yes, you can continue working off campus, but other than that, you must be a full-time student. And obviously the program of study has to be more than 6 months. Another type of work permit or a work situation, I would say, while you're studying in Canada is working as a co-op or intern. Some programs require this as part of their program. And if that's the case, then, the admission paper or the acceptance letter from college or university has to explicitly mention that. And based on that, when you're applying to study for a study permit, you would also apply for work permit, co-op work permit at the same time. So once your study permit is issued, technically your work permit is issued as well. They're for the same duration most of the time. Sometimes work permit is a little like few months extra just to give you that buffer time in Canada to finish your education, graduate, and then continue working. But you are, as I said, you're required to work in order to complete your study program in Canada. And your co-op placement or internship totals 50% or less of your study program. So you can't just say that, I study for 2 months, but I'm working as a co-op for a year. That just doesn't work out. It has to be for a certain duration of time. Again, a little bit of a leniency from IRCC side, similar to the off-campus requirements or provisions. From November 2022 to December 31st, 2023, international students may not need to apply for a co-op work permit if certain requirements are met. And again, if you're part of that group or have questions about it, then reach out to us. So I'll get into the details. One thing about the work situation with the international students is that there's so many intricacies into it. And as I sort of alluded to at the beginning of my conversation, there's just many details that I couldn't really put in here. So once we get into the question and answer part, hopefully we'll be able to kind of dig in a little deeper, or you can reach out to us after the webinar and we'll be happy to answer your specific questions. So with that, we kind of went over all the work situation during the studies, and now it's a postgraduate work permit and what happens after studies. So there are, let me just go through this. Yeah, so Rebecca, do you want to talk about the first part, the postgraduate work permit inside Canada?
Sure, so we have postgraduate work permits mostly apply to inside Canada graduates. And Sonia actually had a question for you regarding outside Canada graduates that I'll get to in a minute. But as you can see, the requirements are essentially that the application for PGWP must be submitted within 180 days after graduating. You have to show proof of your degree or diploma, as well as a full set of transcripts. You have to have maintained full-time status as a student. And of course, the study program should have been completed at a designated learning institution. And like Sonia mentioned, there are a lot of intricacies and, different varying situations based on your background. And so, other requirements will come into play as well, but those are the sort of main requirements to get a PGWP inside Canada. So Sonia, how do you think the pandemic has created more options for graduates that are seeking to apply for a PGWP from outside of Canada?
Yeah, so COVID pandemic created very interesting era when it comes to dealing with workers and students coming to Canada. And as part of it, the impact that it had on PGWP specifically was that because of the travel restrictions, it wasn't easy to enter the country for international students. So there were many situations where students got their study permit approval but couldn't arrive in Canada or couldn't study inside Canada because of the restrictions. So what IRCC did was to introduce provisions and certain sort of exemptions that those people could continue study from outside of Canada and still be eligible for PGWP and for all the other benefits that international students would get inside Canada. As part of it was that, when you finish your program outside of Canada, you'll be able to qualify for PGWP and apply for it right away without even requiring a study permit approval. As long as you have your transcripts and as long as, it shows that you've finished that program and you've graduated completely, then you'll be able to, shoot in your PGWP application to IRCC. Like I said, there was no need to have a valid study permit at any point. And so there were, again, so many dates were introduced. So like the date that we discussed on the previous slide, November 2022 to December 2023, there were so many time frames that were introduced during the COVID, and then they all expired, and then the new time frames were introduced. So it kind of became very convoluted and complicated. So without getting too much into the details of each timeline, we just decided that, on high level information, we'll just put out what we talked about. And then once, like I said, again, if anybody has any specific questions about their own case with specific dates that applies to them, then we'll look into that situation and we'll answer them to the best of our knowledge. So with that being said, I think we kind of covered everything that we wanted to say about the international students and the work permit situation, and we kind of and we can get into the questions and answers. So like I said before, my email address is here, Rebecca's is here as well, and you're more than welcome to reach us out if you feel like there's something that needs to be discussed in more details and requires more time. We're more than happy to answer you. You can also reach out or check us out on LinkedIn or check our website for more information about international students. Like I said, we're always happy to hear from you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing so that I can start seeing the chat and the questions. Okay.
So Sonia, I'll start with one of the good questions I see here from Marie. Oh, and before we get started with this portion, I just wanted to throw a quick disclaimer out there before we begin that we're not providing any legal advice today. It's for general information purposes only. Okay, so back to Marie's question. So once you finish the PGWP, if an employer makes a job offer, does it require an LMIA? Are employers used to applying for LMIAs, and how long can it take?
Okay, now we're talking about another stream of work permit altogether. So one thing about PGWPs that I kind of didn't mention, and again, I'm glad that you're asking this question because like I said, I could really go on and on forever about PGWPs and international students, is that there's a provision that, PGWP holders in Canada can extend their PGWP for another 18 months, starting from April 6th, if I'm not mistaken, right, Rebecca? Yes. So yeah, starting from last week, whoever that has a valid PG or expiring PGWP, they could apply for extension. So in your situation, what you could do, you could extend, I don't know the details again exactly of, when your work permit is expiring, how long you've had it and all that. That may be something that, off of webinar or after webinar, we can take a look at and then kind of finalize our response. But in general, if I want to give you an advice or, comment on your question, is that you could do two things. Either extend your PGWP for another 18 months, which gives you this flexibility of having an open work permit and being able to work for any Canadian employer in Canada, or you could go through LMIA, as you mentioned, through your employer. The processing timeline really depends on what type of LMIE you're applying for. I have no idea what your title is, what kind of employer you have. We've got different streams of LMIE, and every stream has their own timelines. If you're, for example, applying under the Global Town Stream LMIE, then the processing time is really 10 business days. But if you're applying under the High Wage LMIE, it might take up to a month or two. So, and that's only on the LMIE side. Then you would have to apply for a work permit extension once you get the approval from LMIE, and that also takes another 5 to 6 months. But then again, you might be eligible to apply for work permit at the port of entry. And if that's the case, then you're sort of like overpassing this 5-6 months processing time. You can just go outside of Canada, come back, or do a flagpole. So again, if you want, you can reach us out after the webinar and we'll get into more details on that.
Okay, so I see another really great question. So they're saying, I'm applying for my first study permit. Do you have any tips to secure a higher chance of approval? So I think maybe I can answer this question. So in our experience, we've seen when individuals submit their study permit applications for the first time or without the help of a representative, we do come across a lot of the same reasons for refusal. So I'll go over the 3 main reasons that we see applications getting refused. So first is not showing enough proof of financials. So like I mentioned before, there's a big emphasis on the financial aspect. So just to give you a rough number, so there are minimum funds that are needed to support yourself as a student and family members who come with you. So if you're by yourself, it's $10,000, and this does not include the tuition that you have to pay. For the first family member, so say you're bringing a spouse, it's $4,000, and then every additional accompanying family member is $3,000. So you kind of have to keep those figures in mind as a minimum amount to show in your documentation. So another reason that we see is the purpose of study. So your program of study has to make sense with your overall career goals, and it has to be a logical transition and trajectory of what you studied, if applicable. So for example, if you have a Bachelor of Business, for example, in your home country, you shouldn't really be selecting a hospitality or nursing related college program. Like that just doesn't really, make sense. So in this case, the natural trajectory would be a master's or maybe a postgraduate certificate in business. Another factor is that you have to show how this Canadian education increases your chances of employability or success in your home country. So maybe you can show that wherever you're currently working, for the role, they want you to go ahead and gain this Canadian education so that you can bring it back and use it in your current role, the skills or information that you require. You'll also need to show that, no other local programs were available to you at a lower cost, sorry. So those are kind of aspects that are really important to show in your application. Now, the last common reason for refusal is a lack of home ties to your home country. So it would be really good to show that you have family ties, if your spouse or children aren't coming with you, that, they are back home, proof of any community or local organization memberships involvement. Maybe you can say that, you need to look after your family members when you go home, your parents, for example, any other financial assets such as properties, that kind of thing. So you really want to show that you've come to Canada for a temporary stay and that, you do have factors that are bringing you back home. I think I've covered most of the reasons there. I'm going to check to see if we have any other questions. Okay, so the next question I see here is, if I apply for a study permit and get a refusal, what are my options or next steps? Sonia, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll take it. That's a good question. And that comes up oftentimes. It really depends on the situation. So I'll give you an example. If somebody has studied in a bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Computer Science, and now gets an admission from post-secondary college diploma program for something IT related to complement, the education, and gets a refusal, what's going to happen? That kind of goes generally along all kinds of refusals. You're allowed to put in as many applications that you want, but the next step or the next application that you're putting in has to have something different. So you can't just put in the same information with the exact same proof and documents on and on. So you're not really increasing any chances there. The only thing that's changing is that another immigration officer will pick up the file and review it and assess it, but your chances are still very much 50-50 or below, because now you already have a refusal in your history. So what I would suggest is that try to make a change on any future applications that you're putting in. If you can upgrade your acceptance letter here from the university or college, do it. If you can change the proof of financial support, add more, or add more connections to your home country, showing that you're definitely going to come back after finishing your education, do it. If you can take your English language test to show that you're really, really proficient in language and sort of supplement that, or if you can show that there is any job opportunities, work opportunities in your home country, and if you continue this program and study this program and graduate in Canada, you can come back in your home country and be very helpful to certain organization or be very productive, then do that. So again, it's all very much a case-to-case basis, but you can definitely put in as many applications going forward, but you just have to alter, make changes, introduce new information and proof documents so that hopefully you can prove your argument that you're coming to study in Canada and the pure and genuine intention is to study, and then you will return to your home country after graduation.
Okay, great. I see one other question here. How long is it currently taking for study permits to get processed for applicants outside Canada? So I think I can take that one. So I actually did check today. There's a portal where we can go ahead online and kind of get a rough estimate of the processing times, and this can fluctuate, as quick as every day. So today it's saying 8 weeks, which is amazing, 2 months. Of course, this depends on certain factors, like whether your application is complete, how long you take to respond to any requests or concerns from IRCC. And then, of course, there's also biometrics and, other factors that are involved, but it's approximately 8 weeks. And then I don't think I mentioned the processing time for the student direct stream. It's actually 20 calendar days. So it's a great option, especially if you're, part of one of those 14 countries and you think that you can get a suitable result on the language test, have enough proof of financials. I think it's a really great option to go with.
Yeah, just a disclaimer here that, whatever IRCC mentions on the website is the average processing time, and, different consulates in different parts of the world, they have their own mind and they have their own processing times. So when you see 8 weeks it's just a generic just a general rule of thumb, I would say. That's and right. Doesn't necessarily apply to the country that you're coming from. Depending on where you're applying and which consulate is going to process your application, then we would have to look into the details of what exactly the processing times are at that specific consulate. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we covered all the questions.
Yes.
Do we want to wait for another maybe minute if anybody else wants to pose any questions? Okay, so there is one question coming. How do I validate my diploma from a university outside Canada? Are there programs to validate, for example, an engineering diploma? I'm trying to understand this question mostly. By validation, do you mean getting it qualified or certified for the program that you want to study in Canada, or for immigration purposes? Because they're two different things. So there is a qualification process. We call it an ECA process. Can you help me? What does it stand for, Rebecca?
Educational Credential Assessment.
There you go, Educational Credential Assessment. There is that process that's, applicants or individuals are encouraged to use, or actually, it's actually mandatory to use if you're graduated outside of Canada. Obviously, the degree or diploma that you've obtained has to be sort of assessed to make sure that what is it equivalent to in the Canadian system. So that ECA process does that for you. But that's not necessary for somebody who wants to come and, continuing the education here in Canada. It really is up to the university, I think, or the college that you're applying to sort of evaluate your background education and figure out if they're accepting that diploma as it is, or if they want you to study a little bit further in Canada to sort of get the equivalency. I don't know if I explained it well, but I'm just trying to kind of let you understand that there's going to be two different processes. What university and colleges are doing here is specific to each organization and institution, but what's needed for Immigration Canada is different. And for that purpose, you definitely need a qualification of your degree.
Okay, I think we have one more question. Paula is asking, she doesn't understand the difference between student direct stream and the regular study permit process.
Do you want to take a crack at it?
Sure, Paula. So essentially the student direct stream is just an expedited way of processing your study permit application. As we mentioned before, it's approximately 20 calendar day processing time. And as far as the requirements, it's just the documentation that's different. There's added documents that you have to provide under the student direct stream. So that would be the language test, that would be extra financials. There was the guaranteed investment certificate of 10,000 Canadian dollars. So proof that you paid your tuition for the first year of study. So these are the three main different or additional documents that are required for the student direct stream. And of course, this program only applies to individuals from certain countries that we mentioned earlier. There was a list of 14 countries. So that's essentially the main difference. Sonia, is there anything else that
No, not really. Not really. No, that's about it. And if you want to know the list of countries or which countries those were, I mean, this whole webinar is being recorded so that you can, review it later and you can get to the slide, or you can reach us out and then we'll be happy to share the copy of the slides with you. Okay. I think that's about it.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, great. So on behalf of BCCC, I want to thank you, Sonia Mirbaha, Principal Partner at SMB Immigration Services, and Rebecca Godinho, Immigration Lawyer at SMB Immigration Services, for their presentation. This webinar has been recorded and will be available on YouTube channel in the next few days. Thank you for joining us today. And remember to follow the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce and SMB Immigration Service on social media. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Adriani. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.